substance use disorder, or if you have a parent with a substance use disorder, a grandparent, aunt, or uncle with a substance use disorder. Please stand if you have a brother or sister with a substance use disorder, a husband or wife, cousin, niece, or nephew. Please stand if you have a friend, coworker, or care for someone with a substance use disorder. Stand now if you know of anyone who struggles with a substance use disorder. Look around you and see that all of you are standing, pretty much. So why is there still such a stigma surrounding addiction when it touches so many lives? Each of us holds the power to help shatter the stigma associated with substance use disorders. Shattering the stigma will help remove barriers to treatment and raise awareness to understand that addiction is a disease. It is a chronic disease of the brain. Like cancer, this disease needs to be treated. Like cancer, we need to provide prevention, treatment, research, and most of all, hope. The person with the disease needs understanding and compassionate support while receiving treatment. Caregivers need our support. Let us all help to shatter the stigma of addictions and focus on healing and recovery, not shame.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? My name is Vicente, and I'm a person in long-term recovery, and I want to welcome you to the Shatter the Stigma of Addiction event. You hear me in the back? Have a couple of announcements. You probably are already aware of where the restrooms are located out in the hall. I'd like to thank the planning team that put this event together. They've worked over very hard over the last couple of months. Sue Avalon, who you've already met, Michelle Dunn, also on the planning team, and Lauren Sanders. So let's give them a Also, in the background is the promotion team from Luck, and I'd like to just make mention of Bridget, Cindy, and Tom for putting on the background, the flyers, helping with the t-shirts. So give them a hand of applause. Also, for those of you who are representing organizations, I want to thank you for showing up. I believe we have 20 organizations out there with resource tables, and so that's a great showing. I'd like to also acknowledge that. It demonstrates the amount of support that the community has in dealing with the stigma of addiction. Also, last, I'd like to give a round of applause to the community engagement team that are here, taking pictures and making sure that everything is going in an organized way. So last hand of so we have a panel. Before I read the panel, before I introduce the panel, I have a letter here that I'd like to read. Being that this is an event that focuses on the continuum of prevention, treatment, and recovery, the words on these pages will resonate with parents, treatment providers, and just open up your heart and hear the words of recovery and hope. It starts off a little rough, it gets better. I hate everything that has to do with recovery and ending the stigma of addiction. I hate everyone who has a program of recovery. To all who come in contact with me, I wish you death, and I wish you a life of suffering until you die. Allow me to introduce myself. I am the disease of addiction. Cunning, baffling, powerful. That's me. I have killed millions. I love to catch you with the element of surprise. I love pretending I am your friend and your lover. I have given you comfort, have I not? Wasn't I there when you were lonely? When you were in so much pain that you wanted to die? Didn't you call me for some relief? And I did not fail you, did I? The truth is that I love to make you cry. Better yet, I love when I make you so numb that you cannot either hurt or cry. You cannot feel anything at all. Yes, that is when I am at my best, pretending to be there for you to ease your pain while waiting for you to die and leave behind the tears and misery of your family and friends. Isn't addiction a wonderful experience? I've been there for you always, and unlike your family and friends, I have never let you down, have I? I give you instant gratification, and all I ask is long-term suffering. I've been there for you from the very first high, and it was pure magic and total love, wasn't it? When things were going right in your life, I was there. When you said that you did not deserve these good things, I was the only one who agreed with you. Together, we were able to destroy all the good things in your life. I am such a hated disease, and yet I do not come uninvited. Whether by choice, genetics, or the environment, so many have taken me over reality and real peace. More than your hate for me now that you are in recovery, I hate all who are in recovery through whatever way they achieve it. In recovery, I cannot function as addiction. Now I'm going to slide here and wait quietly. You don't see me, and you've forgotten the good times that we've had. When you only exist, I live. When you truly live, I only exist. But I am here, patiently waiting for you to give up your recovery nonsense through a relapse. And I will wait to see if we meet again. And if we don't meet again, there will be others that I will be able to wish pain, suffering, and death upon. There will always be others. Yours, without sincerity, addiction. That is a relationship that personifies the stigma of addiction that we are here to do our part to shatter. So we have treatment providers, we have parents, we have children, we have wonderful panelists, we have a keynote speaker that will speak to it. And with that, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Ruth Pody is a family and addiction medicine physician at the Valley Medical Group in Greenfield, Mass. She is also the medical director of the new Franklin First Step Recovery and Treatment Center in Greenfield. In addition, she has a few YouTube videos about addiction worth watching. So I want to thank you, Dr. Ruth Pody, for joining us.
That was such a powerful letter. Have other people heard that before? I'd never heard that. That's extraordinary. And what did you wrote that?
Yeah.
You wrote that?
Yeah, it's not finished yet.
Holy smokes! I'm stealing that one from you, my friend. That was awesome. Okay, so I have 45 minutes, and I have never given this talk in 45 minutes. I'm totally panicked. I'm going to talk really fast. There's some slides I'm going to have to race through. I had to cut out slides early this morning. There's a longer version of this, and there's going to be like a sign going up saying I have 5 minutes left, and I'm having a nervous breakdown. So we're going to race through what the brain looks like with addiction. There's 3 parts of the brain that make up the reward center of the brain: the nucleus accumbens, the ventral tegmental area, and the prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of the brain that is considered the most ancient elemental part of the brain. It is the part of the brain that gets you to survive. It tells you to wake up every morning, find good food, find water. And although you didn't think this was your job every day is to send your genetic material forward. Your job is to find a mate Have sex and send it forward. That isn't how we think of ourselves these days, but it is actually our role as mammals on this planet, as living creatures, is to survive long enough that we send our genetics forward. So it's this part of the brain that allows us to survive. It is this part of the brain that feels that deep reward when finding the right food or when finding the right mate, but it is also this part of the brain that is impacted by addiction. And if we can pick up addiction and move it to the visual cortex or the part of the brain that hears sound, addiction wouldn't be a hard disease to treat. Like, who cares if you lose your peripheral vision when you're addicted, right? That would be an easy thing to fix. And instead, it's this most fundamental part of the brain that's impacted. So we're not going to spend any time talking about the neurotransmitter called serotonin, which manages mood and sleep and cognition. We're going to spend all of our time on dopamine. Dopamine is the purple in this map. And this is this neurotransmitter that gives you this deep sense of pleasure and joy and reward. And man, I'm coming back for some more of this because this was really good. It has two behaviors associated with it: compulsivity, compulsiveness, and perseveration. And that makes sense because when you and your ancestors were living in a cave 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, you needed to perseverate on finding food, water, and a mate, and you needed to be compulsive about it. It needed to be the last thing you thought of before you went to bed and the first thing you thought of in the morning. It makes total sense that those behaviors would be associated with survival. When you take those two behaviors and apply them to addiction, they're not such helpful behaviors. They're part of the definition of addiction. They're actually part of the pain in the neck part of addiction for those of us who've struggled with people in our lives who we love with addiction. Those two behaviors are pathognomonic. So some of us in this room have high dopamine levels at a baseline. And there's no real way to measure dopamine in your body. It's not a blood test. There's no PET scan that is able to measure exact spikes of dopamine. But I'm going to make an argument that at a baseline, on average in this room, our dopamine levels are 100. Some of us are just lucky. We have good genetics or epigenetics or whatever. And our dopamine levels at a baseline are a little bit higher, 105, 107. We're those glass half full, you can't beat me kind of people. And then there are a lot of people that show up in my office, because this kind of person is in my office more than often than not, whose dopamine levels at a baseline are just low. Maybe they're sitting at 85, 87, and that's just who they are. And you guys have these people in your life. They're sort of those, the Eeyore type, like there's just nothing you can do to affect change in their lives. You have no idea you come up with, are they going to sign up for? So if you think all of us are sitting at 100 at a baseline, and it's now June, and June in Massachusetts is strawberry season, and for me, when that first June strawberry comes out and you put it in your mouth and you actually have 27 flavors in that strawberry as opposed to those horrible things from California you've been eating for those last 9 months, you get a spike in dopamine because your brain's like, that is awesome, that is a good thing, that I just got some vitamin C, I got some fiber, I've been living in a cave for the last 500 years, I've been desperate for fiber and vitamin C in my diet. You get that spike of dopamine that goes to 150 because your brain is saying you need to come back to the strawberry patch a year from now. This is a good thing. When you have sex, it's consensual sex, you have an orgasm, your dopamine spikes to 200. You need to be returning to this behavior in order to survive. When you use a drug like cocaine, your dopamine will spike to 350. When you use a drug like a strong prescription opiate or heroin, your dopamine will spike between 500 and 900. And when you use a drug like crystal methamphetamine, your dopamine levels will go between 1,200 and 1,300. So those are great dopamine levels, and it's always amazing to me that more of us are not waking up every morning doing crystal meth. Because most of us would really want to be feeling like that, because that is, that's 8 or 10 times sex. That I'm in on whatever that is. That sounds great to me. So the reason that we don't continue behavior that has dopamine levels like that is the following, and that is that when the brain sees a dopamine level of 300 or 600 or 1,200, it says, holy smokes, something is going on here that is not part of nature. I have been in this form, as you all have, for 200,000 years on this planet, and there's nothing that should give you a dopamine of 900 or 1,200. And the brain says, something's wrong. In the past, I control my dopamine with 3 things: how much dopamine I produce, how many dopamine receptors are on the other side, and how many little vacuums are sucking dopamine out of the synaptic cleft. And when the brain sees this, it says, I'm going to stop making dopamine. I clearly don't need more. I got way too much on board. I'm going to cut it off. I'm going to increase my number of vacuums, so I'm sucking all the dopamine out of the synaptic cleft. And I am going to erase 80% of my receptors on the other side because I clearly have too much. So it starts to down-regulate. So people who are struggling with an addiction, I know I'm racing through some of this stuff, have gone from a dopamine level at a baseline of 85 or 100, and they now have been down-regulated to, on a day-to-day basis, they are sitting at a 45 or 50. It is hard to get out of bed, it's hard to go to work, it's hard to pour a bowl of cereal for your kids, it's hard to be nice to me in my office, it's certainly hard to be nice to my office staff when your dopamine level is sitting at 45 or 50. People continue to use drugs because they are desperate to feel normal again. Desperate, right? They're not just chasing a high. The highs leave you, right? Not so long into the struggle with addiction. People are desperate to feel functional and normal again. They would be delighted to get to be in ER on a day-to-day basis. They would love a dopamine 85. So again, normal baseline, you have an orgasm, it returns to normal. With addiction, it spikes to some high level and it starts to hit the basement. It doesn't happen the first time you use, it doesn't happen the first week. It's a process that might break down over a period of several months. So I talk about the concept of a broken brain, but I could talk about the concept of a number of organs in your body that begin to fail. And this concept of a broken brain is for us to also acknowledge that people get better and things can heal. So we're not going to talk about it necessarily in this talk, but during the panel, I hope that we spend time talking about what works to help people get better. When you go drug by drug with this disease, that column on the right, these are PET scans. Anything orange is dopamine. It's that bright lit up one. That column to the right is a nice, the middle column is a nice healthy brain with lots of dopamine in it, and the column to the right are people struggling with an addiction to a variety of substances. That first row is somebody with cocaine, so you don't see a lot of orange going on there. The next one down is somebody with meth. Really not a lot of orange there. The third one down is alcohol, and the final one down is heroin. And I guess I want to point out alcohol to folks. Alcohol still has some dopamine activity. You can see there's a little patch of orange on that brain. Alcohol is actually one of the most destructive substances in our society, and I think we under-acknowledge that as a society. People, when you go to the jails, we always think they're filled with hardcore criminals. Most of our jails are filled with people with addiction, and half of that addiction is alcohol-related disease. And as those of us who struggle with alcohol ourselves or in our families, boy, the wheels come off that bus fairly slowly, right? You can still work as a functional alcoholic, you can still kind of hold your family together for a while before you piss off too many people and your kids start yelling at you and your husband walks out on you. My point is that the dopamine system gets shut down a lot later in the game. So there's a lot of us who are functional alcoholics, and we're going to spend some time talking about alcohol use disorder. So I want to acknowledge that although I think often I'm up here and people think I'm just going to talk about opiates, really this talk is about all addictions, whether it's to a substance or to a behavior. And there's many addictions out there. They all work in some complicated way in these pathways. So obviously there's alcohol. Do people think caffeine can be addictive? Yeah. You can have continued use despite harm, compulsive use. Are most people robbing banks for their Dunkin' Donuts? Probably not. Most people aren't going to get incarcerated for it. In fact, some level of caffeine is actually considered beneficial and healthy. So, but yeah, it definitely can meet the definition of addiction. Sugar, addictive? Yeah, anybody a sugar addict in the room? Right, and we have continued use despite harm. We know it doesn't, at the end of the day, make us feel better. It actually makes us feel worse. We've been trying to lose that 10 pounds. We actually struggle with diabetes, and we just can't help ourselves. Gambling, sex. My point is that you can walk through a complicated pathway with every behavior that's addictive or substance that's addictive and end up at this reward center of the brain with a spiking and a downregulation of the dopamine. So I make it sound really simple. I know that. It's not simple, right? The brain is the most complex organ in the body in that this is a really complicated disease. Again, one of the reasons it's so hard to treat and why people struggle so hard. This is a great article that came out in the New England Journal this year that actually goes through the reward circuits and why it is that people relapse, why it is that we crave, what it is that happens when you get triggered and cued. It's a lovely kind of complicated, but it was the best analysis I've ever seen. So if you Google it, New England Journal, and these slides, one, they're getting filmed, but these slides can be available to anybody who wants them. There could be maybe a sign-up sheet somewhere, an email, and they could be sent out by these great organized people, because I don't care who uses these slides. You can take these slides and go deliver this talk yourself as far as I'm concerned. You don't need to cite me, just get the message out there. I want to talk what happens at our local hospital. So our local hospital here, there's Haywood and Gardner, but this is Leominster Hospital, right? And this, I bet this happened today, ready? So this is the way this one rolls, because this happened at my hospital today. So that guy in the upper left is a 64-year-old man who's having crushing substernal chest pain. His wife calls 911 and the ambulance shows up. They have an EKG on him instantly, and its message gets transmitted to Leominster Hospital ER. They put in an IV, they give him some morphine, they give him a sublingual aspirin, they give him a beta blocker and nitroglycerin on the spot, because they know this guy's actually having a heart attack. He's transported to Leominster. Do we do bypass in Leominster? No, right? Those guys get med-flighted to Worcester? Does anybody know that?
Yes.
I say they do. I know nothing about Leominster Hospital, but I'm going to say this. So this guy gets brought into our ER. It is clear he's having a massive heart attack, and he needs a quick cath, and he may need bypass surgery. So most of our little community hospitals, I grew up locally, so I can say this, don't do that kind of work. So he's going to get med-flighted either to Boston or to Worcester. He's going to go there. They're going to do a quadruple bypass on this guy. He's going to go to the cardiac care unit for 4 days. He's going to go to the floor for another 7 days. He's going to see a cardiologist and a pulmonologist. He's going to see a social worker, because he's going to get depressed, because all men with heart attacks get depressed. Then he gets an outpatient appointment with me and his new cardiologist and his new therapist, and he's going to get cardiac rehab. Okay? That's what happened to him, 64 years old. This young woman is his next door neighbor. She's found down in her bathroom by her mom. Her mom knows she struggles with an opiate use problem, had Narcan available at home. Mom calls 911, gives her Narcan. She pops awake, she's pissed. 911 arrives. They have to give her a second dose in the truck, because she becomes non-responsive again. She's brought into our local hospital, and what happens to her? So somebody said detox. Other people are saying discharge. So first of all, does your local hospital run a detox? No, right? How easy is it to find a quote-unquote detox bed? Really hard. And even if you magically somehow had a miracle happen and you got her in a detox, most places will keep her for 3 to 5 to 6 days and then discharge her with no treatment plan. So we actually may have actually caused her harm by putting her into detox. So I think the most likely thing is that she's counseled, if she's lucky, and given a brochure. Here's some numbers you could call. Meanwhile, she has vomiting and diarrhea because we just withdrew a drug from her brain. She's pissed. She actually had spent her last savings on that, what was actually a really lovely high. It was a great mixture of fentanyl and heroin. But my point is that in the 30-day, 60-day, and 90-day cycle with these two individuals, one person got $250,000 of care, and another person got nothing but a brochure. I want to go back on that 64-year-old, because you know what you don't know about that guy? He's a pack-a-day smoker. Both of his parents had heart attacks in their 50s. He kicks back, I don't know, a 6-pack a day. He's had untreated blood pressure for a decade. He doesn't come see me, his primary care doctor, or if he does, he tells me he takes his blood pressure medicine, but he doesn't really do it. He eats at McDonald's twice a week. Every one of those behaviors that he has, because they're all behaviors, created his medical condition called cardiovascular disease, which gave him a heart attack, right? He could have changed every one of those behaviors, the most important one being stopping smoking, and he would not have had a heart attack. He knew this, right? In some ways he knew this. But when he rolled into that ER, did somebody wag their finger at him and make that entire list of his bad behaviors and say, you know what, you're not going to get any medical care from us, right? We're not going to treat you that way. And my attitude about the stigma of addiction is we start to treat people either completely equally, and we start discriminating against all of us who are unhealthy, making bad food choices, overweight, not exercising, smoking too much, and say, you know what, none of you are getting medical care. I'm only providing medical care for my vegan marathon runners. That's who gets medical care, right? And the rest of you, the rest of me, we're done. We could do it that way, which I think would be appalling, and I'm not advocating for that. Or we recognize that so many of the diseases that we all experience, in some way or another, we kind of cause. Now, I'm not saying everything. Obviously, most cancers, although lots of cancers are caused by smoking, but lots of our behaviors create the diseases we experience, and that is no different than addiction. So let's start treating every one of these things equally. And that woman deserved as much attention to be paid to her in every way, shape, and form as that man did. there's 3 things that are going to predispose you to an addiction, and there's 3 plus 1, but the first is genetics, the second is early exposure, and the third one is a history of trauma. Mental health disorders are part of all of this. If you have bad genetics, if you have anxiety and depression or a major mood disorder as a teenager, you're much more likely to have early use. If you're somebody with a history of trauma, you're much more likely to have a mental health disorder. So the mental health disorder is a little bit secondary, I would argue, or sometimes it is the thing that triggers the early use. But normally I think of this as 3 things. You don't need all 3 things to develop an addiction. You really need 1. But there are very few people who have nothing going on and then develop an addiction. There's usually something there. So the genetics are huge with addiction. It is hard to find any disease out there with this much genetic predisposition. So for those, I have 2 medical students in the room, and we spend a huge amount of time talking about genetics, but those of us in medicine actually really know that genetics plays a small role in most of our long-term outcome. People are always talking to me about their cancer risk, and I think to myself, your cancer risk is actually pretty small. It's really the fact that both your parents smoke that caused them to die. That's the real reason. So the genetics on addiction, though, are 50%, meaning if one of your parents struggles with an addiction, you have a 50% chance of developing an addiction yourself. There's some psychiatric illnesses that might be that high. A.E.D has pretty high genetics associated with it, but there's very, very few. And the reason I pause on this is I don't have lots of students in the room, and I love when I have students in the room, but I have a lot of parents in the room. And the people in your life that need to know your genetic risk of addiction are your children. And they should know it pretty darn early, right? They don't get to control their genetic predisposition. It's given to them. They need to be told the honest truth about your own struggle with addiction, your ex-wife's struggle with addiction, and your parents' or in-laws. So I'm talking parental level and grandparent level is the level of transmission that is the strongest. Because they don't get to control this, they get to control the next thing, which is early exposure. So all addiction starts while the brain is developing. There are very few people who will ever have an addiction starting after the age of 24 or 25. Now, I'm not saying there's not those of us who are 47 with an addiction. Of course there are. But they started sometime before the age of 24 with some addictive substance. And that is 96, 97% true. And when you're sitting in a room with somebody with addiction, you say, what did you start with and how old were you? It doesn't change their outcome or my experience. It helps inform the 2 of us of how this happened. Most people will say, I started when I was 12, 13, or 14, which is what this graph will show. And most people in this country start with alcohol, marijuana, or tobacco. These days, it's marijuana. And we're going to dive in on marijuana. So when you look at it from an alcohol use disorder alone, if you're age 15 and you're drinking 2 drinks a week, 2 alcoholic beverages a week is not a lot of alcohol when you're age 15. 40% of those kids go on to be alcoholics. If you wait till age 21 to start drinking, 7% to go on to be alcoholics. Think about the difference between a 15-year-old and a 21-year-old. There's a massive difference. And there's a massive difference in terms of their brain development. So addiction is a developmental pediatric disorder. And our kids who have a genetic predisposition to addiction, which they don't get to control, they get to control this. So with my own kids at home, where I talk about our own personal genetic risk, I say, look, you're not the kid who should be drinking at the age of 15, 17, or 19. You're intentionally the kid who really needs to postpone. And when I take care of my patients in my office, and I know their parents, I actually take care of their dad at the jail. I know and they know their dad's locked up because he is addicted to heroin. I say to this lovely 13-year-old, I know you don't want that life, love. And the only thing that you get to fix in this situation is your first exposure. So we're going to spend every year I see you, twice a year I see you, we're going to talk about all the ways that you're not going to be the one that shows up at that party. You're going to stand in the corner with your little ginger ale and you're going to make sure your girlfriends don't get hauled up the back stairs. Because in order for you to protect your brain, you've got to postpone your use. And if you can wait and start exposure, because guess what? Most of us are going to drink eventually, right? I like to say to all my teenagers, I never want you to smoke. But if you can wait to expose your brain to alcohol or marijuana after the age of 21, you almost get to cancel out your genetics. The genetic risk almost disappears. It becomes like 5% or something. That's extraordinary, and that's the only thing they can control. So who needs to know this? Your kids need to hear this. Okay, so I'm going to dive in a little bit on this, and frantic about time. So I'm going to say that the third component of who's going to develop an addiction is people with a history of trauma. So the A.E.D study came out in 2007. It's a Kaiser study from San Diego County, white middle class. And what it did is it asked 10 questions of people, thousands of people, of what might have happened to you under the age of 18. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, partly because I appear to be blind up here, but I know nobody else can read it either. So these are things that might have happened to you under the age of 18. I'm going to read just some of it. When you were growing up, did someone in your household, I really can't see the screen. Did a parent or another adult in your household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks? Were you ever sexually abused? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or that your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or that your parents were too drunk or too high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if needed? Was someone in your family ever incarcerated? Did anybody in your household have major mental illness? Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Now this may seem like a crazy trajectory I've headed off to, but this study showed that if you score a 3 or a 4 or higher on the A score, that it is predictive of every chronic disease bad outcome out there, with the exception of diabetes and strokes. People who scored a 3 or a 4 or higher were more likely to have emphysema. They were more likely to die of a heart attack. They were more likely to die early by 3 to 4 years. They were more likely to have 50 or more sexual partners. They were more likely to have broken bones. And specifically, they were most likely to develop the disease of addiction or develop the disease of chronic pain. And in many ways, partly because of the letter that was read by Vincenti in the beginning, if you are somebody who had a really traumatic childhood, if you are running from pain and sadness and grief and guilt and shame and all those things that our kids experience growing up in chaotic households, it actually makes sense that, one, you learn to self-medicate with a variety of things. Sometimes it's just sugar, right? You sort of end yourself on a trajectory of unhealthy behavior. But often people are self-medicating for the psychologic pain and grief. And there's no better way to numb yourself up than to drink alcohol or use an opiate, right? You want to check out? Hook yourself onto some Xanax, right? You don't need to feel a darn thing. Okay, so those are the 3 genetic predispositions, the 3 factors that are likely to lead to a lifetime of addiction: genetics, trauma, and early exposure. I have to say that our teenagers are making the best decisions ever when it comes to cigarettes. Our rate of tobacco smoke among high school seniors is like 5.3%, never been lower in history. It's a huge public health celebration for us. The problem is that the rate of marijuana use has skyrocketed. And there's this decreased sense of harm. And if you ask the average teenager about marijuana, what do they tell you? It's not addictive, of course not. Yet, what else?
It grows in the ground.
It grows in the ground, it's organic, it's safe. Yep. What else?
It's legal.
It's legal. You could just light up a big joint right over here. Absolutely. What else? Nobody ever dies from marijuana, right? People are actually benign on marijuana. They're not dangerous. It's better than alcohol. So I'm just doing the common list that I get from my own teenagers, but I want to talk a little bit about marijuana only because it's coming up on the ballot really fast. I want to talk about the developing brain. There's 3 things that happen during the age of 12 to 24 that are supposed to happen. It's why our teenage brains are so extraordinary. They have got to be doing these really critical things. The first thing that the teenage brain does is they get rid of synapses. Our brains have tens of billions of connections, way too many. No brain needs that many. It's actually kind of disorderly and disorganized when there's too many synapses. You need to prune them back. You need to cut them back. And you want to make sure you're cutting back the right ones. There are times during adolescent brain development when you are losing 30,000 synapses a minute. That's a lot of activity. I looked at my kid. I have one of my kids with such a pain in the neck. The last 2 weeks, she has been horrible. I don't know where she came from. And I said to my other daughter, I said, I think she is going through a massive change in her brain these last 2 weeks. There's something shifting, no way to measure it, but luckily I think she's not out in the backyard smoking marijuana, and I think she's not drinking because all my alcohol is locked up at my house. My point being that this is a critical time where really important things happen, and everybody in this room can imagine all the ways it can go wrong. So the other thing that happens is you ensheath the brain, you get these really efficient pathways through myelination, you get a really chaotic looking brain and have it become quite organized. There are two receptors that get laid down during this time. One is dopamine. We've talked about the critical nature of dopamine in our lives. But the other one is this endocannabinoid called anandamide, which nobody really in the room, except maybe my two medical students, has ever heard of. This is a natural endocannabinoid. It gets laid down in the outer part of the brain when you are a teenager. This natural endocannabinoid looks just like THC, except THC is like a magnet to these receptors, and it goes in there. The job of anandamide is to make a decision about what synapses get kept and which ones get thrown away, and to help make decisions about myelination. So it is a critical receptor in the brain. THC is like a sledgehammer. It moves into that receptor and takes over. And so THC exposure in a young brain makes very bad decisions about what gets kept and what gets lost. It is not a health food. I don't care if it's grown in somebody's backyard. It is not a supplement that is helping the developing brain. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't care what an adult does with marijuana, as long as they're not driving, doing knee surgery on me, or putting the lug nuts on my car. I really care about our teenagers using marijuana, and I want you to care about it as much as I do. So this is where the anandamide receptors are in the brain. They're in the outer cortex, that final part that gets cooked. And when we do studies, and I want to be clear, very few studies are done in this country because you can't study an illegal, right, Schedule I drug with federal money. So we don't get to do tens of millions of dollars of good studies. Most of the studies on marijuana use has come out of Australia and New Zealand. But they have very well-conducted studies spanning a period of 30 years, looking at a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old who starts with marijuana, and then they look at their lives when they're 35, 38, and 40. Shows an 8-point drop in IQ, shows a very high I am dissatisfied with my life score. So people with teenage exposure, as they grow into adults, they just didn't get where they meant to be. The problem with this study, also lower high school completion, lower entry into college. The problem with the study is it's based on yesterday's marijuana, right? Everybody knows this. The marijuana we had in the 70s and the 80s up until the late 90s was between 1% and 2.5% THC. So for those of us in the room who've ever used marijuana, that's what you were using. That was what was being used in that study. Today's field-grown pot is ranging between 9% and 16% THC coming out of the field. Straight, right? You can't find any 2% out there. It doesn't exist. Somebody's gotten rid of that seed. And then it gets intensified to be even stronger. So these are the forms that marijuana now comes in. Does everybody in the room know how to use this stuff? Does anybody in the room even know what this is? I mean, there are some people. So these products, whether it's butter, Shatter, earwax, which is a product that one might dab, right? Doesn't that look like earwax? That's disgusting looking. But these range between 70% and 100% THC. And I can guarantee you that IQs are not being increased when you're using 70 to 100% THC. So every study we have that says this has big impact on the developing brain, I tell you, we have no idea what is about to hit us if we legalize marijuana in this state. Again, I don't care what an adult does. I don't care if somebody has a medical certificate. I'm fine, as long as they're not putting other people in harm's way. But keeping this drug out of the hands and brains of those under 21 is critical. And the entire industry is based on the fact that half of their selling has got to be under the age of 21. The industry is intended to addict our kids, right? What does that remind you of? Tobacco. We've done this before. We've gone through this before. Do we need another addictive substance amongst us? Most of us don't think so. So, again, if I put a big fat joint in front of the average 15-year-old, they wouldn't know what it was. If I put any of this stuff in front of the average 47-year-old, right, I get pictures texted from parents and stuff they find in the room, and they're like, what is this? And I'm like, oh, those are products used with marijuana these days. I know you don't recognize them because they're foreign to you. Because all of this is foreign to many of us of a certain age. Lots of ways to consume this stuff. So, this is pictures. Anybody been to Colorado? Right? Welcome to the Colorado candy stores. Every one of these products has marijuana in it. They have cute little marijuana-type names. This is intended to attract your children. Intended. The back of these things say THC levels in these range between 70 and 100%. Each candy bar may have as many as 12 servings. So the last time you shared a Kit Kat with 11 other people was when? Right? So part of the ballot measure is all of this stuff could be legal, right? There's nothing in the ballot measure that doesn't allow us to look just like Colorado. The highest rate of marijuana use in the entire country is in Denver. Why does that surprise anybody? And this is my favorite article, also New England Journal, just Google it. It's an article that Sharon Levy wrote. And all it does is say, look, I'm not going to judge marijuana too much, but I'm going to remind you what tobacco did, right? Back in the day, in the year 1900, tobacco was not a particularly addictive substance, right? Our native people, the original people that lived on this planet, used tobacco for rituals. They weren't smoking the equivalent of 2 packs a day. They used it a little bit. They didn't even use it every day. But by the year 1950, 50% of us were smoking cigarettes, 2 packs or more a day, right? Because what happened? They grew a more potent product in the field, tobacco, just like our marijuana, and they intensified its delivery system into our lungs, and then they added 350 or 550 other chemicals to make sure you got addicted hard. You think the marijuana industry is not going to do that exact same thing? Okay, this is what matters for recovery. This is the only thing that matters really, and that is length of time and sobriety. Here I am telling you that part of this brain gets so disrupted, part of this very critical reward circuit is interrupted, and it takes time to get better. Which is why 5 days of treatment is laughable. Which is why 30 days of treatment is the feeling like maybe you could take a first breath to get the next step planned. It takes a long time of sobriety before people can really say, holy smokes, if you put that drug in front of me at month 24, I would turn my head and walk away. But until that time, it's very hard to walk away. So we base our model of treatment on alcohol, right? You're going to have delirium tremens and seizing and die with alcohol withdrawal sometime before 7 days. So all of our detox is based on alcohol, right? Some crazy old like 1950 model, yet that's what we do. And that's what our great state of Massachusetts continues to fund. So when you look at abstinence, that top brains, our brains in this room, most of us are nice healthy brains not currently actively using, but 10 days of abstinence from cocaine gives you that middle row. Right? Nobody wants that brain. But 100 days of abstinence from cocaine, which is pretty darn awesome. It's not like I shrug my shoulders at 100 days. It gives you that bottom brain. That brain's not looking good. When I get some judge calling me saying, I need you to stop their medical treatment for their addiction because I think they're done, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't think so, lady. I don't know who you think you're talking to, but I can tell you I'm not stopping their treatment because it's going to be court ordered. You show me the evidence that their brain is improved. And again, diabetes, right? Take diabetes. What would it take for these 2 women to be non-diabetic? Would it take 5 days? Would it take 30 days? I mean, what would you do to make these 2 women non-diabetic? Really? You would put them at Canyon Ranch. They would work out. They would do exercise 4 hours a day. They would get chased up and down mountains by a personal trainer. They would be forced to become vegans. I'd have to go to their house and empty out their pantry. I'd have to move them from the food desert they live in and give them enough money they could buy healthy food and then teach them to cook it. And then I'd probably just move a personal chef in with them to manage the rest of their lives. So right there, $250,000 to make them non-diabetic. Instead, of course we don't do that because we would bankrupt our nation, but instead we say, wow, diabetes, a chronic disease that needs chronic treatment, and seeing me and saying, wow, you're down 7 pounds, that's great, let's keep going, maybe we can get rid of your metformin soon, right? But it's a long-term process working with people, and addiction is the exact same way. So when you look at the rates of relapse with certain diseases, do you know what the relapse rate is? The i.e. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing is with asthma. It's like 70%. When I ask my patients, are you using your corticosteroid, your preventer? They're like, I don't know, is that the orange one? And I'm like, yeah, you're not using your corticosteroid. Of course they're not, they never do. The average hypertensive patient with blood pressure problems, takes their medicine 50% of the time, right? Diabetics, I have patients who walk into the ER, they're like, I stopped my insulin the last month. I hate diabetes. I just decided to stop. Right? They relapse. They relapsed with their diabetes. And again, did they get bad care in the ER? Did somebody kick them to the curb? No. In fact, they got more care. Somebody called a nutritionist and a diabetes educator. They call me their primary care doctor. We treat them for depression. We bring them in closer because they're clearly struggling. So the relapse rate with the most common chronic conditions out there ranges between 50 and 70%. The relapse rate with addiction is 50%. So let's go with this judgment that we all have, because we all have it. Okay, alcohol. How am I doing?
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes, oh my God, okay. So, okay. A third of us in this country drink zero, not a drop of alcohol, and there's reasons for that. And a third of us in this country drink a couple drinks a week, a couple drinks a month, not very much. And the final 1/3 of us drink all the rest of the alcohol. And in fact, the final 10% of us drink on average 10 drinks a day. 10% of this room, statistically speaking, kicks back 10 drinks a day. That doesn't seem possible because I hear the gasps out there. But I want to remind you what a drink is. A beer is a beer. 12-ounce beer is a beer. The definition of hard alcohol is 1.5 ounces. So the last time you poured yourself something in a glass, I know you didn't measure with your little shot glass 1.5 ounces. So most of us are more likely drinking 3 or 5 or 6 ounces of hard alcohol, which is really 3 drinks, let's be clear. And then the most important category these days is the number of women who come home and have a quote-unquote couple glasses of wine. And if you ask yourself what is in your giant goblet at home, you are not pouring 5 ounces of wine. And I always, when I ask my women, I ask all the time, what's your relationship with alcohol? I ask the men too. I just know that this is a higher risk population right now. What's in your glass? And they're like, oh, I don't know. You know, it's a wine glass, which again is not your grandmother's wine glasses. I say, I need you to put 5 ounces of a liquid in your glass. I need you to acknowledge that line. And I need you to acknowledge what you're really drinking. I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to shame you. I just need you to know your own truth, which is that many of us pouring a glass of wine are really pouring 2 to 3 glasses in a single glass. This is a very routine thing. And why? The industry is targeting women. And for my women in the room, and I'm one of these women, you work really hard. Most of us not just work, but we run everything at the house. We're up at 5, we do laundry. Most of you are going to go home and be up till 11 or midnight tonight. You're going to go home and no one will have either started dinner or cleaned up dinner. My breakfast dishes are still on my counter from this morning. And I'll come home tonight and they will still be there. I am mad 98% of the time at my house. And what do? We self-medicate with alcohol. We think we're a little bit easier, we're nicer, we're a little more relaxed at home if we drink. We have never seen the ratio of women developing an alcohol use disorder like we have in the last 15 years. It is a massive cultural shift. And this is not good. This is not good for women. It's not good for society. And I'm going to say to you that what do your kids see? Man, I've had a terrible day at work. I am so mad. Glug, 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 glug. I hate my boss. I just think I'm going to quit my job. And all they see is they walk into the fridge and pop that top off a beer. And what if every one of us walked in the house and said, I've had such a horrible day. Will somebody go walk the dog with me? I'm going to go stand in tree pose in the other room. Anybody want to do some tree pose yoga position, like tree pose off with me in the other room? Like, what if we actually modeled healthy behaviors of stress management, right? What if we did that instead of drinking? This is the kind of parents, for those of us who are parents, that we really should strive to be. I need us all to think about how much we're drinking. Okay, so when you ask the average EMS worker in the country, what's your #1 drug problem? Those dark green areas, the answer is heroin. What's always shocking to me about this slide is the Southeast and so much of the country, it isn't heroin, because we're living in such a heroin struggle right now. But what I want to remind you about the rest of the country is those dark purple states are states where there's a vast quantity of opiate prescriptions available. So those dark purple states are on average between 1 and 1.5 opiate prescriptions per person per year in those states. Massachusetts has never been a heavy prescribing opiate state. We never have been. I've been practicing here for 15 years. We've been sitting at number 40 out of 50, 41 out of 50. This is not a pill mill state. In general, there's not a lot of rogue bad doctors out there. This is not a heavy prescribing state. Most of our meds came from other states that our people got hooked onto. But look at those purple states. Right? You think that Mississippi is building methadone clinics? When you look at the country and ask where the heroin problem is, it's us, it's Illinois. But when the pipeline of pills starts to really get shut down on those purple states, every one of those purple states will become a red state. Because when you shut down the pipeline of the pills and you're left with a whole cohort of people addicted to meds, they will only choice is to go to heroin. And I just heard on NPR this morning, right, that Georgia's putting a 1-year moratorium on building treatment centers. No more methadone clinics, no more Suboxone clinics. And Georgia, by the way, is the #1 provider of addiction treatment in the Southeast. In fact, many places, including Mississippi, have almost no providers. So I predict tens of thousands of deaths by heroin overdose in the Southeast in the next 5 to 10 years. They have no idea what's about to hit them. So these are great books. This picture is out front because you guys did a great job of sort of showing some of the slides of what we were going to talk about. But if you like the talk on addiction, if you just want to learn more, if you want to spend time understanding more about what trauma does to the body and to the brain, and again, take these slides. I love that people are taking pictures with their phones, but you can get copies of these slides. That book, The Body Keeps the Score, is the best book on trauma I've ever read. He's a beautiful writer. He's a Boston psychiatrist. And for those of us who've had significant trauma, who when I was reading aloud that ACE questionnaire, you were adding up your numbers, I actually think you personally would gain a lot from reading that book. And you would also learn what some of the best treatments are. It isn't talking to a therapist. Most trauma actually doesn't respond to talk therapy. Trauma responds to some unusual types of therapy, including yoga and meditation, including a special eye movement therapy, because the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain are impacted differently. And the left side of the brain is all about the talk, and the trauma's on the other side. So you've got to meet it where it is, and you've got to know for your own self or if you're a clinician how to get your patients the trauma therapy they really need. So anyway, these are all great books. I would recommend any of them to you. And because I want time for the panel, I think I'm done, but we can also take questions at the end of it all, right? Okay. I didn't get cut off, did I, huh?